next speaker is Hani Khalil from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Hani and I go back probably 18 years or so. I first met Hani when I was working in the Caucasus region right after the collapse of the USSR. Our company had a contract with our government to teach about it was called the Farmer to Farmer program. It was about let's help these newly independent states that broke up these huge collectives, and these folks now had small plots of land, how to get them started in farming as a business. And so we sent, I remember Hani's first assignment down to the border with Iran, down in the what's called the Megri region where Armenia and Iran meet. And we must have run 150, 160 advisors through the program in the 3 years I was there, and Hani was consistently amongst the top of all the advisors we had. And that didn't come from our assessment, but from the actual clients themselves, the farmers and the food processors. And there's a good reason why. I think probably one of them is his background, where he had come from. He'd come from a society where he knew things don't always work, and oftentimes they don't work. So I think, you know, being patient and listening to the people, listening to their issues, and again, kind of tweaking, incremental change, building on what they do was probably part of Hani's formula for being very successful. And he actually made, I think, 3 visits when I was running that program. He was in such demand, and I just learned he's going to a couple of other places very soon, so Hani continues to offer his services around the world. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hani.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, guys, so Afghanistan agriculture, there's 2 things to think about. We go to the farm to plant in order to have food. Unless you're talking about tobacco or cotton, it's really all about food. And in terms of food, there are really another 2 options you need to think about. The common one in Afghanistan is what we call a sustainable farmer. Basically, a farmer grows what he eats. If he doesn't grow it, he doesn't eat. A little bit larger farmers, not many, but some in Afghanistan in certain areas, they grow to sell it, to get money, to buy whatever they need. Okay, so ultimately, what I'm going to talk to you about is about food, particularly food security. Okay, and how many people heard of the term food security? It's been around a lot, right? Food, calories. There's also another thing that you may not be familiar with that we're going to talk about today is food safety. Food safety means what to you?
Food that's not going to make me sick.
Exactly. Or worse?
Or worse killing.
Worse killing, exactly right. Okay. So you've heard throughout the week about the challenges in Afghanistan in agriculture. We have soil challenges, we have irrigation challenges, we have watershed challenges, disease challenges, lack of know-how challenges. So the picture is complicated. And if we think about feeding people, because really, ultimately, that's what it's all about. Whether you're going to sell the food or eat it right off the farm, it's about feeding your family, you know, if you're an Afghan farmer. In order to do that, in order to have enough food on the table every day, of every week, of every month, of every year, you have to grow more food. And the developing world has been focusing on that for a long time, and rightly so, because you do need to have more food for folks to have enough to eat. But what's not being common relatively recently is, well, now that we have the food on the farm, what do we do with it? And that's the area that we're going to focus on for the next hour and a half. What are we going to do with the food after we harvest it? And I'm going to show you, if you have a chance to intervene in that area, I'm going to show you very simple ways to do good without any power, without any moving part, without any expensive interventions, and which leads us to conclude that these may be sustainable, because if they don't need anything from outside their community, chances are they're going to pick it up. And that's really the ultimate goal, is for the intervention that you put on the table to take hold, so to speak. Okay. So like Paul said, my name is Hani Khalil. I'm a professor at Cal Poly, which is a sister university to Fresno State. I've worked in about 25, 30 different developing countries, and you see a lot of common denominator when you work in the developing world. A lot of the challenges are pretty much the same. My area of expertise is food science, and I spend time on campus or overseas showing people how to preserve the food supply, okay, the post-harvest area. Paul said that I did well in Armenia, and maybe I did, maybe I didn't, I don't know. But the main reason I think I did well in some of these situations is I do listen well. I do grow up in a developing country, so I know the challenges. I lived in this country for a long time. I know some of the options, what is possible, and I tend to put two and two together and recommend some solutions that are sustainable, that folks will pick up after I leave. Okay, so post-harvest management. We're going to look at grapes as an example, and this is not who you think it is. Okay, you also heard of the value chain, okay? And the value chain basically meaning that after you harvest your crops, what do you do to them moving up to the market? You can actually increase the value of your commodities, or you can lose value, okay? So on the lower end, okay, if you deal let's say using grapes as an example, you deal in fresh market, then you basically have a limited resource in terms of the income you're going to get from selling fresh grapes. The main reason here is fresh grapes, like any fresh fruit or vegetable, they don't last too long. Okay, if they don't last too long, then you're going to lose them. Then you're not going to have the value that you spend all year putting in, and then the harvest, the fruit of your labor, literally is gone. Okay, and then to move up the value chain, you can do something with the grapes to keep them a little bit longer. Okay, for example, in this situation, we have what we call semi-processed food. That is, for example, grape juice concentrate. Somebody was asking earlier about pomegranate juice, and they do have a juice in operation in Kabul relatively recently. Mostly started for pomegranate. Now they do more than one fruit. But the problem is, for that particular operation, is that they don't have enough fruit. So they work only part of the time. Most of the year they shut down. But you can tell they're thinking in terms of the value chain, that you can't just deal with the fresh commodity, you got to move it up the value chain. And then if you have this stage here, then you basically have a little bit more money, because you can maybe go to regional markets, maybe across the border to Pakistan, India, something like that. Because why? Because the food is not going to spoil. Okay, so I want to kind of link food spoilage with dollars and cents, or Afghanis in the case of Afghanistan. And then you go up the value chain, and then you dry the grapes into raisins, which is a very common industry in Afghanistan. In fact, when I was in Afghanistan, I worked with the raisin industry and the almond industry, because AID decided that these two commodities are the likely export commodities. So we were looking at raisins and almonds, how we improve the quality, how we improve the safety. So if you have dry grapes, i.e. raisins, then you can really get into international markets, and you can maximize your return on your crops. The problem is, and some folks have indeed tried to export Afghan raisins, and they taste very well, but they're not very clean and not very safe. Okay, things have improved a little bit since I've been there, but still there's a big challenge in that. So on this side of things, you're really talking about subsistence farming. On this side of things, you're really talking about economic development. And the only difference is how long will your food last. So the take-home message, the more you preserve the food, the more that you control the market, as opposed to the market controlling you, and chances are you're going to get to economic development. Any questions or comments so far, guys? Okay. So the idea, if we intervene in the post-harvest area, we can do a number of good things for the folks in Afghanistan. We can reduce the food spoilage, so there is food on the table. we can minimize foodborne illness, the food safety issue, because if you're going to store the food longer to have the food throughout the year, or at least during the lean season, so to speak, then the more you store the food, the more likely is that the food going to spoil and make somebody sick, or worse, kill you. Okay, so we're going to talk about that a little bit. And then, obviously, this is supposed to be 3, not another 2, is the economic development, having a small business enterprise for the folks to engage in. And ultimately, if we do things right in this post-harvest area, we will have independent civil society in Afghanistan. And isn't that what we're going there for? That's the ultimate objective. Because think about it, you know, whether it is economic development or food security, if you don't really have a few coin in your pockets and food in your belly, you're not really free. And in an Afghan, being an ag society, it's all about the food and how long you keep the food to feed your family and to engage in some kind of small business. So most speakers will give you their conclusion at the end of the presentation. I'm going to give you my conclusion now. And the conclusion is really very simple. Till they grow more food on the production side, help them keep what they grow. And I'm going to show you some simple ways to do that. And hopefully towards the end, we're going to see simple intervention, sustainable intervention. You've heard the word sustainable a lot, and rightly so, because it's very important. If it doesn't take hold after you leave, then you really haven't accomplished much. And then how to transfer that knowledge to the male and Dale counterpart. Okay? And I work with some of the male and Dale folks, some good, some are not, and that could be one of your challenges, to get them motivated to help you with what you're trying to do. So this morning, we're going to talk about food spoilage, food security, and food safety. And then we're going to take a little break, and after that we'll come back, and I'm going to pose a hypothetical situation. If you're on the ground, this particular issue comes up, what should you be thinking about? What would you recommend? Okay, so this is the how we're going to go for the session. And then after lunch on the farm, I'm going to show you some demos of some of the things that we discussed this morning. Food spoils. We all know that. Okay, fresh food spoils fast. Why does food spoil? We can spend hours talking about why food spoils, but let me tell you that everything the food needs to spoil is already in the food. Okay, the food has a lot of chemicals in it that when the food was on the tree, let's say when the fruit was on the tree, those chemicals, we call them enzymes, were there to basically help develop that fruit, right? When you harvest the fruit, or the animal for that matter, all these chemicals inside the food begin to break down the food. And that's the order, the natural order of things. When you harvest things, they begin to die, okay? So everything the food needs to spoil is already in the food. Now, what we do sometimes can slow that down or can actually make it worse, okay? So things in the environment, okay, like heat, humidity, insects, rodent, air, microorganisms, mishandling the fruit by abusing the fruit. Paul told you about how they harvest and they throw the fruit from the tree and the fruit bruises. When you bruise the fruit, that basically cut the shelf life of the food dramatically. Okay, so everything the food needs to spoil is already in it. What we do can aggravate that or can slow it down. And hopefully what we're going to talk about this morning is how can we slow down some of that spoilage. If you want to summarize them in terms of how food spoils, an important one always comes, number one, is microorganisms. So that organisms, if you studied biology or microbiology, you know, very small organisms that you need a microscope to see. And why is that important? It's important because we don't see them, and we tend to ignore them. And when you ignore them, they spoil the food, or worse, make you sick. So I kind of want to point out that just because you don't see them, it doesn't mean they're not there. They're there, and they're the major cause of food spoilage and the major cause of foodborne illness. Things are so small that you cannot see. And then we have larger organisms, rodents and insects, enzymes, those chemicals already in the food, breaking the food down. when you harvest it, and then mishandling, like bruising the fruit, and obviously everything in the environment in terms of heat and humidity and so on. Now, they don't really take place one at a time. They're all happening at the same place, depends on the environment you're in, what kind of crop you're dealing with. So all of these spoilage reactions are taking place at the same time, simultaneously. But we tend to focus a lot, like I mentioned, on the microorganisms, the small organisms that you don't see. And the reason we do that, like I said, because we don't see them. If you see insects or rodents, you tend to address them, do something about it. But on the other side of that apple, we have a lot of microorganisms. I don't see them. I tend to forget about it. A little bit about food safety. Like I said, the whole objective is we're going to keep the food a little longer, so the farmer will have something on the table every day. And if he's going to go to the market with some of the excess commodity, he'll have some money to buy tea, oil, whatever else he needs to buy. So food safety is a major issue across the globe, to include in this country. And I can tell you, I worked in about 30 different countries. We have the best food handling system in the world. Okay, some Europeans like to challenge us on that front, but we do very well in terms of food safety. Yet a lot of folks in this country get sick every year. A lot of folks in this country die from food safety or foodborne illness. So you can project that the situation in Afghanistan is probably very dire. So this is one thing not to have enough food. It's another thing to have the food spoils and make you sick. Okay, so it can be a double whammy, so to speak. So just kind of want to keep the food safety in the forefront of your mind for what you're going to do in Afghanistan or for your day-to-day practice. Go ahead.
This may be a dumb question.
There is no such a thing.
Well, I know when you talk of food safety, I think of when I was in Africa and I ate that banana and it made me just terribly sick. So I'm curious, like, is there a resiliency that we, like, because we're not exposed to those organisms, are we more susceptible to...
Exactly, you're right.
But does that mean that but that doesn't negate the fact that Afghans eating their local fruits are still getting sick because of
That's
the
right.
proper handling?
That's right. So there's 2 points. You're right. We live in a clean environment, and that basically makes us more vulnerable when our system is challenged by microorganisms. So this is one thing. That's the downside of living a clean life, so to speak. An Afghan counterpart, because he's been part of the system, he has a bit more resistance, but still, it's a matter of what kind of organism and how much. And also the person, is a young child or an older person? These tend to be the vulnerable groups, children, elderly folks, because their immune system is weak. Also folks with immune compromised disease, they tend to be a lot more vulnerable. Okay, so everybody's vulnerable. Different categories of folks, different lifestyle will make it a little different, but ultimately we'll all succumb to those tiny things that we don't see. And everybody here, I'm sure, gets sick once or twice from eating a bad taco or a bad whatever the case might be. And you know, in a couple of days you feel terrible and you get over it and you move on. But some folks end up in the hospital. Some folks actually die from those organisms that you don't see. Okay, while we're on people getting sick and dying, not a very pleasant topic, but it's a reality. Can anybody venture a guess how many folks die from foodborne illness in this country every year?
20,000.
20,000 is high. 5,000 is more like it. The numbers go between 3,000 and 5,000. There's 3,000 to 5,000 folks dying every year from foodborne illness. So the food that's supposed to nourish you can actually kill you. Now, for those 3,000 to 5,000 who die, there's about 75,000 or so that got sick and went to the hospital. That's how we know about them, right? And there's a whole bunch more, close to 100,000 or more, that got sick but never went to the hospital. Okay, so the numbers are astronomical. You know, sometime in the million. It depends on the particular outbreak. So, take-home message: if we try to save the food for folks to eat, we want to save it in a proper way, to have the food on the table, and to make sure folks don't get sick. Okay. All right, so I want to keep the food safety thing in mind, and 3 things I want to have you think about if the topic of food safety comes up. That there is really 3 categories of what we call food safety hazard, things that can make the food poison the people who eat it. By far, the largest one is the biological hazard. Those are the microorganisms that we talked about. And there's a whole different categories of those organisms, bacteria, mold, virus, it doesn't matter which one, but we know that they're so small we can see them, and they're the major cause of foodborne illness. So that's a big one. The other one is what we call chemical hazard. This is mostly in the developing countries come from abuse of ag chemicals in the field. If the farmer can afford ag chemicals, most of them can't, so therefore they're organic by default. But if he has access to chemicals, and if a little bit is good, maybe a lot is better, and they tend to overuse ag chemical, that can end up in the food and can make people sick. Also, if you improperly store the food next to chemicals, cross-contamination will take place, and folks can get sick from what we call chemical hazard. And then finally, the last one, and the bottom 2 are very insignificant really compared to the first one, but nonetheless they do take place. The last one is basically anything that falls into the food supply that you don't see that can end up hurting you if you eat the food. And we talk about glass, nails, stones, anything like that that can make you sick if you eat the food. Questions so far, you guys? Okay, back to the food security. Some folks will tell you that the major challenge facing humanity today is the lack of food, and I agree with that. It's not oil, and it's not the Taliban, it's not water, it's not pollution, it's none of that. All these are important, but the major issue facing humanity is that we don't have enough food. Right now, we're 7 billion, and by 2050, we're going to be 9 billion. That's about 28% increase in numbers, okay? But do we have more land going into agriculture? No. Do we have more water to irrigate that land that we don't have? No. So if the situation is dire now, looking down the road, it doesn't look as it's going to get any better. In fact, all indications say it's going to get worse. Okay? So if you add up all the food available, all the people that need to eat 3 times a day, 5 times a day, if you're like me, we're really heading towards a problem that we need to address. So the food security issue is not only in Afghanistan. And Afghanistan happened to be very, very dire at this moment, but globally it's the issue. A lot of folks going hungry in this country. The latest stat is 1 in 6 goes hungry at least once in a while in this country. So it's a major challenge. The sad part is most of the hungry are children. And if you look at Afghanistan or any other developing region, that's a double problem, because not only the children don't have enough to eat, but if they don't have enough to eat, they're not going to develop mentally or physically as adults. And guess what? When they take over the reins of their country, they're not capable of doing so. So the hunger problem has long-term implication. Like I said, food security is a global issue. It's a lot more dire in Afghanistan. Okay, and you know the stats. You can have a lot of stats. They all point to the same situation. That we have an issue that we need to deal with. And somebody reported that in Afghanistan, hunger kills more people than the Taliban, and I agree with that. Okay, so remember, the major challenge is really not having enough to eat. You guys are not asking enough questions. I'm used to a lot of Q&A because I don't know what you don't know. So let's go around the table and get at least one question from each table. Start with this table. Any question?
Yeah, I got a question.
Okay, we'll start with this table.
Deaths in Afghanistan. What's the leading cause for, for foodborne illnesses there? I mean, is it from a certain type of
The environment.
or
The-
is it just
The environment, yeah. So the environment is very polluted. In fact, I hate to gross you out before lunch, but in Afghanistan, if you walked around Kabul, anybody here been to Afghanistan before? Yeah. So if you walked around Kabul, your eye will burn, your nose will itch, because there is a lot of airborne pollution. Okay. Aside from the dust and so on, there is a lot of fecal matter that gets dry and gets airborne. So I mean, the environment is a source of pollution everywhere, particularly so in Afghanistan. Then you add to that the fact that they mishandle the food storage. Again, if you've been there, you've seen the meat cut up and outside hanging with the dust and the dirt and the flies and so on. Environment is polluted, mishandling the food, and not really knowing. I mean, most folks around here, a lot of my students, they have difficulty dealing with those microorganisms that we don't see. Your typical person in a developing region has no clue what that might be. So lack of know-how, mishandling the food, and the environment is polluted. You don't have to do much. Then you add to that, aside from the microorganisms, the macro, the insects and rodents, not only they eat some of the food, but they bring contamination into the food. So you add all that together, then they have basically a challenging situation. Let me just one thought before I take your question. When I was in Afghanistan, I told them my mission was improve safety and quality of almonds and raisins to enhance exports. So obviously I'm a food science guy. I'm thinking food safety. So went to the government official and asked, how many people get sick in this country every year? How many people die from foodborne illness? I couldn't get the answers. I don't know if the answer don't exist or they don't want to share it with me, but it's difficult to address a problem when you don't know the scope of it. But I can guess that it's a severe problem. Go ahead.
Can most of this be mitigated with the preparation of the food? Like
Yeah.
boil the meat,
Right.
boil the fruits?
Right. So if you're going to cook the food, you cook it longer to high temperature. That's going to take care of most of it, not all of it. There is some situation where there's the microorganisms produce toxin on the food, and the toxin is heat resistant. So you cook the food from now till tomorrow, the toxin are not going to break down. In a lot of situations, the toxin will break down because the heat will kill the microorganism. Again, most of them. Okay, but if there is a toxin that is what we call heat resistant, then the cooker is not going to take care of it. See what I mean? Yeah.
There's a big push, like with ministers of health, they'll get a generic CD through the national level Ministry of Health, and they'll air it in their local area as far as food preparation goes, but it doesn't mitigate what he's talking about. But yeah, and if that's not in your district or your area, you're going to want that specifically.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so this table, a question. I can tell you have a question.
I do.
You do go
All right,
ahead.
value chain. You talked about the value chain. Is there a specific example of like how you can improve the value chain of a particular item to make it worth more?
Yeah.
Like a provincial or regional market and
Yeah.
international market.
If you can hang on till we finish the first part, I think I'm going to address that. If I don't, ask me again. But yeah, there is some simple intervention. There is a lot of interventions, okay? But I'm not going to tell you about what we do in this country. I'm going to tell you what works in Afghanistan. So when I finish that topic, if you're still not clear on how we do that, we can talk about that. Yeah. That table.
My question is, how serious is the threat of agricultural toxins like aflatoxin?
Aflatoxin is an issue. In fact, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Yeah, aflatoxin issue. Yeah. And yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned like food security and how like it affects the future of a country. Do you have an example of a country where they have recognized that as a problem and then like
Addressed it?
Yeah, I know it's a generational thing, so it's probably hard. But
Boy, in all the countries that I worked,
kind of the
it's
first time I've ever heard it like that, and that's such a good point.
it is a reality, and a lot of folks dealing with it. The UN organization, they're all dealing with it because it's a simple math. You figure out how much food we have.
Do you think like one of the Asian countries, like Hong Kong or Taiwan?
Well, Hong Kong and Taiwan are very much developed by this stage, yeah. But at some point they were. Take China, for example. It's the second largest economy, right? That becoming our competitive on a geopolitical situation. In China, you go to Shanghai and it's wonderful, fancy buildings, nice streets and everything on the waterfront. You go 3 blocks back and it's It's devastation. It's a third world country. Russia, I work in Russia. Again, at some point, Russia was our main nemesis in the world. And you go to Russia and you have the military power, and they have all the sophistication and the science and technology, but a lot of folks are going hungry. So it's really it's a global issue. Like I said, it's in this country, not as an extreme as, say, in Afghanistan or somewhere in Africa, but it's across the board. It's across the board. Yeah, go ahead.
We keep hearing about how Afghanistan is food insecure and that such a huge percentage of their population doesn't really know if they're going to have enough food to make it through the next season.
Right.
And that it's such a destabilizing factor that
Right.
all these nefarious actors can take advantage of. But when we say that somebody's food insecure, is it more of in Afghanistan, is it more of a production problem? Like they just simply do not make enough? Or are these things like post-harvest losses, failure to maintain their food properly, failure to produce it properly? Is that what's impacting it more, or is it more of a production?
It's both. It's both. And my message is the production, to have enough on the table, you have to grow more and you have to keep it longer, right? The grow more, there is a lot of work need to be done, but my message today, since we're talking about post-harvest, till we grow more food, like I mentioned in my conclusion, whatever we have coming off the farm today, let's not throw any of that away, and let's make sure it's not going to get anybody sick. But the problem is both ways. It's both ways. Naveed, do you have anything to add to that in terms of food security? Is it production, post-harvest, or both?
It's both.
It's both, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
We also waste a lot of
Yeah.
we lose a lot of food after the
Yeah.
harvest.
And that's why we're talking about this, because, yes, we do need to grow food, but like Naveed said, we waste a lot of food. So why can't we just think about it and intervene to make sure the food doesn't spoil? It's right there. It's off the farm. I have it right there. Let's use it till I figure out how to grow more.
Yeah, I think
Good
it
question.
goes back to lack of skills for process and storage, but also lack of infrastructure, proper infrastructure to get that transported and to get that stored. It's a skill problem in infrastructure.
Yeah. Know-how, infrastructure, and so on. Yeah. Thanks, Naveed.
Related to that question, you mentioned earlier that Afghan raisins are not very safe and not very clean. Is that really post-harvest management issue?
Yeah.
Or is it also related to infrastructure and the ability to produce?
That one is mostly post-harvest, because raisins, when you dry them, nothing can go wrong with them. What happened is we mishandle them, and I'm going to show you some pictures, and they get contaminated. In fact, did Gary Kuhn come and talk to you folks from Roots of Peace on Monday? Yeah, Gary Kuhn brought some raisin, and I brought some raisin when I was there, and those green raisins. And I wanted to demonstrate when we hold the class in St. Louis. So I opened the bag of those raisins, the beautiful looking raisins, in a bowl of water. And remember, those Gary bought them from the airport, so this is the export quality. This is the top of the line. And the bowl of water turned brown. You dump that water, put another water, a little bit less brown, 3-4 times before the water was clear. So every speck of dust on there, not it's a contamination on its own, but every speck of dust has 1 million of those microorganisms on. And that's the issue. So in that particular case, if we handle it a little bit better after we dry the raisin, we can eliminate the problem. Did I get a question from that table? Oh, you guys asked the first question? Okay, all right. We're good. Any other questions, you guys? All right. All right, so let's go to Afghanistan. So here we're outside of Kabul, right? And this is a storage warehouse. Pretty good building, in terms of the structure of the building. But what we see here is a chemical hazard, and it's not very clear maybe from the boxes, but what you have here is basically a warehouse that anybody can lease a square footage in. And you have folks bringing in food to be stored. They have folks bringing in ag chemical to be stored. They have folks bringing in automotive chemicals to be stored. And everything is in the same room. Everything commingled. So remember when we talk about the potential hazard, people make folks sick. Something as simple as that. Now, assuming that the food that came into the warehouse was clean, by mishandling the food, something as simple as keeping the chemical away from the food, you can eliminate a potential food safety issue. Something as simple as that. Physical hazard. What did I call this? A physical hazard. Now remember, let's go back. What was a physical hazard? Anybody remember? Glass. And what do you see in this picture? Folks online drinking their tea. They love their tea there, and that's fantastic. But if that glass fell, it's going to break, and some glass piece is going to get into the raisin. And if you don't see that piece of glass, somebody's going to eat it. And guess what? Somebody's going to end up going to the hospital if you have a chance to do that. Again, if we didn't talk about that, if you see a situation like this, it might just, go over. You're not going to think about it. But now that we talked about it, I want to kind of have you develop a keen eye for picking up potential problems. Something very simple. Biological hazard. Let me tell you the story behind that picture. So here we're in a raisin plant in the Shamali area, a little bit north of Kabul, and those young ladies come to work with their moms and help them on the line. Now, when I go to inspect a plant on the food safety side, first place I want to see is the bathrooms. Not the bathroom where the managers and his crew use. I want to see the bathroom where the workers use, because those are the folks going to handle the food all day long, right? And I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for soap and hot water. In this plant, no water, no soap, let alone hot water. So these young ladies went to the bathroom, took care of business, came back, and helped their mom on the line handing the raisin. Okay? So I don't need to go into details, but you can see how the contamination happens. You've heard of E. coli, major issue in terms of foodborne illness in this country, and this is how E. coli happens. Flip-flops next to the raisin, what kind of hazard is that? It can be all three. Depends where those flip-flops were. Were they walking on stones or glass? Were they walking on some ag chemical or automotive chemical? And definitely they have some microorganism on the biological thing. Okay, so what you put on your feet shouldn't be near your food. Aflatoxin. Normally, when we talk about mold, in most situations, mold is not as harmful as some of the bacteria. But in Afghanistan, we have a mold that produce toxins that are deadly to man and animal. And the reason we take a couple of minutes and talk about it is because it grows on some of the things that are available in Afghanistan and important to Afghanistan agriculture. That's almonds, wheat, and to a lesser extent, corn. Okay, so aflatoxin is a mold, and it looks kind of olive green color, kind of like uniform a little bit. Okay, and that particular mold will grow and produce toxin, like I said, to man and animal. If the farmer is familiar with aflatoxin, a little bit, he might say, I know this stuff is bad, so I'm not going to feed that to my family. I'm going to feed it to my animals. Guess what? His animals will die as well. So it's toxic to both man and animals. If the farmer knows about it, that's great. If not, and you see some grain being stored and have that olive green mold on it, explain to the farmer the potential problem. He may or may not take your advice. At least you clear your conscience. Say, I know this stuff is bad. That Khalil fellow in the course told me it's bad, and I believe him. So at least you clear your conscience on that one. And usually that happens if the grain are not dry enough. If the corn or the wheat or the almonds are dry enough when you store them, chances are it's going to be okay. When the grain goes to storage not dry enough, that's when the mold takes place. No, in the mold?
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you see it in the field.
Is it have you ever seen it affects a large area, or is it just little?
I haven't seen it a lot in the field, although sometimes you can see you have an ear cone or something and it's growing on that. Usually towards the end of the growing season. I've seen it more in the storage area because, in the storage, everything, you have a lot of grain in a small area, and if the grain is not dry enough, you have that humid environment with a little bit of heat, that's when the mold love to grow. So far, you guys, our message that in Afghanistan, being an agrarian society, all they do is agriculture. Post-harvest intervention can mitigate food security, economic development, and food safety. Okay, so take-home message, a little bit of intervention on the post-harvest, we can address 3 major issues with not a lot of know-how or in terms of investment. And like I said earlier, if you have no food in your belly, no coin in your pocket, you're not really free. Then the Taliban or the Qaeda or the next nutty group is going to come and they're going to interfere with your country. How about a little break? All right? Okay. I'm going to pose a hypothetical situation. If you're on the ground, this topic comes up, what kind of thinking process you need to go through in your mind, and what might you recommend? Keep in mind that it has to be sustainable, okay? And I'm sure you've heard of the 3 cups of tea, and no matter how you feel about the fellow, that is true. Because remember, you're going to hopefully try to intervene, and that takes communication with the village elder, the imam, the dale guy, whoever your counterpart might be. And unless you have that communication channel open and clear, no matter how good the intervention you're trying to bring across, it may not really come across. So I always tell folks, if you have 10 days to do something in a village, take 9 days to know the folks, and then on the last day, communicate your message. Because if you have the channel open, everything you say will resonate. So the first option is cool storage. Remember all these problems that we talked about in terms of why people go bad? It doesn't matter what the reason is. If you keep the food cool, remember I said cool, not cold. Cold meaning mechanical refrigeration, power, energy. We don't have that. Okay, at least we assume we don't have that. I know we don't have it in most places. Some folks do, but most don't. Okay, so cool storage. So no matter what the situation is, if you keep the food cool, you're going to extend the shelf life, and then you're closer to the value chain situation. So in the practice, we're going to talk about 2 options of keeping the food cool without energy, without power, without moving parts. One is evaporative cooling, okay? And I'm going to show you that on the farm this afternoon. The other one is underground cooling, okay? So if you're dealing with fruits and vegetables, the likely issue, and that issue comes across throughout the developing world, is I have basically no access to market, timely access to market, to get there while the fruit in a good shape to sell, because I don't have the transportation, the roads are bad, and a whole number of different issues, okay? And as a result, basically, my quality goes down, and I end up losing money, and most folks, they don't even bother harvesting the crop, because they figure out if I harvest it and take it to market, I'm not going to make what I invested in it. And one of the reasons, aside from the challenges of the infrastructure and the logistics, is think about it in any particular region. Let's say take tomatoes. Everybody in the world grows tomatoes, and I did a lot of work on tomatoes. Everybody grows tomatoes, and tomato harvest comes at the same time. So everybody has tomatoes. Prices plummet. That's why farmers don't even bother going to pick up their tomatoes. So the nature of agriculture, the seasonal nature, makes selling the fruit in timely manner not a good economical situation. So the smart farmer is plant early, plant late if you can, through different varieties, which is another option, or store it till the supply goes down, then I can get more for my money. Okay. So no matter what the issue is in terms of spoilage, keeping it cool is a good thing. Okay, so if that was an issue and you're in the village talking to some of the folks, so your thinking process is, well, deterioration of fruits and vegetables is caused by improper handling and storage temperature. Okay, so I got to handle it properly and keep it cool. So your answer is, I'm going to tell you how to maintain the quality and reduce the deterioration till you can get it to market. And then they ask you, well, how are you going to do that? Evaporative cooling. So the principle, you guys, and we're going to see this this afternoon, is any structure, and the structure doesn't really have to be strong because it's not supporting anything except the weight of that burlap bag. Okay? So any flimsy structure can work. Okay? And then you put the fruit inside and you put some water on the burlap. And the water evaporates, it pulls heat from that environment, and the fruit stays cool. It depends on how warm it is outside. You can see a difference in temperature of 20, 30 or more degrees between the inside and outside. And today you're going to see that in the afternoon. Okay?
How does humidity work with that? Is it better in low humidity areas, or is it better to use that in a high humidity area? Or
Good.
Is it anywhere?
Good point. I mean, it's a better option than nothing at all. The warmer it is, the drier it is, the better the system works. Because remember,
Humidity is better.
that's right. Low humidity and warm is better, because my principle here is that for every pound of water on this burlap, in order for that 1 pound of water to evaporate, if you know a bit about energy, it takes about 1,000 BTUs. So I want the water to evaporate. And in order for the water to evaporate, the environment had to be dry and warm. So, and that's actually a plus in terms of the situation in Afghanistan, where we harvest fruits in the summer. It's very hot in the summer, so I use the heat to my advantage. I use the heat to evaporate the water to cool the environment. Okay, so I'm working with the environment, not against the environment, with no energy, with no investment, with nothing really, except from a simple structure with a little bit of a burlap bag. It doesn't have to be burlap. It could be any material that soaks up water. Old T-shirts, bed sheets, whatever. Anything that can soak up water and evaporate the water.
Oh, here?
Yeah.
But with this system, do you have any time period of high quality product that can sustain in this system?
Well, if you have your fruit till you get it to market, you want to keep it in there.
Well, my question, let's say we have pomegranate in this system. How long the high quality last?
Well, how long can you keep the fruit there cool and have it good? It depends on the commodity. So if you compare, say, peaches, apricot tend to be very fragile compared to, say, pomegranate, compared to grapes. So every one of those will last different times. But in general, the longer you keep it in there, the better off you are, because it's going to be cool. Eventually, it's going to spoil. Even food in the refrigerator that you're keeping it cold, not cool, it will spoil, right? So it's a matter of how much time do I have to get it to market in a good shape.
15 days will be...
Could be a lot more. Could be 6 weeks, could be 8 weeks. Again, it depends on the commodity. Yeah. Other questions, you guys? Okay. Okay, so evaporative cool, one option to keep the fruit cool. The other side of thing is to minimize the mishandling the fruit so you don't aggravate the situation. And in that respect, there is a very simple things you can suggest, again, that are sustainable. It doesn't need power. It doesn't need moving parts. Okay. One thing that I notice throughout the developing regions is most folks will pick their fruit, and I'm focused on fruit because they have high value in the market compared to, say, a vegetable, for example. Most folks will pick the fruit when it's ready to eat. So unless you're going to bring the customers to your orchard and have them pick the fruit and eat it right there, that's not going to work. Okay? They're great when you pick them up right off the tree, but they don't have any shelf life left in them to store them, to get them to market, and make it to market in a good shape. So here what I like to kind of point out the difference between mature and ripe. Mature is the right size, the right color, the right flavor profile, but not ripe. Ripe is like when you take a ripe plum and you eat it and the juices drip throughout. Okay, it's just beginning to fall apart. It's so sweet, beginning to fall apart. That's the wrong stage. So sometimes if the farmer goes in a couple of days early to harvest, when the fruit is a little bit firm, it can handle the storage and transportation, he's way ahead of the game. Simple value added. Okay. When do you harvest? Okay. If you can go in early in the morning or late in the evening when the environment is cool, the fruit is cool, then you have a head start on the fruit being cool. Instead of going in at 11 o'clock when the sun beating down and harvest the fruit, because you spend the morning drinking tea with your neighbor. Very, just a couple of hours difference, a couple of days difference. No energy, no moving parts, right? when you harvest the fruit, you don't pull the fruit. When you pull the fruit, the stem sometimes will stay on the tree. And what happens, you actually have an opening in the fruit, in an apple or peach, whatever the case may be. And that opening will begin the contamination for those microorganisms that we don't see. So the fruit with a stem on it, as opposed to fruit without a stem, the one without the stem will spoil a lot sooner. Again, very simple. Just cut it with a shear, not pull the fruit from the stem. And then use harvest bags. I'm going to show you some harvest bags this afternoon. Harvest bag, it looks like a backpack you wear on the front. So the idea is that you wear this harvest bag, climb the tree, gently pick the fruit, put them in the harvest bag, come down, and then empty the fruit on the ground, or hopefully on a mat or something to keep a barrier between the fruit and the ground. That will give you a much better fruit for the long term. In general, you want to minimize handling the fruit. Okay? And if you hand them gently. Okay? And put the fruit on a mat. Don't put them right on the ground where the soil is contaminated. Okay? If you have some fruit that is bruised or damaged or moldy, remove that from the bunch. You've heard the term one apple spoiled a bunch. That is true. You remove that out of the way. Okay? And somebody earlier said the sorting. They tend to sell everything in one lot with the good-looking fruit on top. Okay? And to the credit of the person who mentioned that this morning, I think that was you, if you spend a little time sorting, the lower grade of the higher grade, maybe charge more for the higher grade as opposed to less for the lower grade, you can actually end up making more money for the same lot instead of just sending everything at the same time. Okay. Now, the Afghan buyer is price conscious, so he's going to go for the lowest price. But there's a lot of folks in Afghanistan, particularly in the cities, Kabul, Kandahar, and so on, who are willing to pay a little bit more for the high-quality fruit. So if you kind of talk to the farmer about sorting the good from the not so good and price structure different, he can end up actually making more money for the same lot. Simple value added. And if you're going to do sorting by size or color, do it in a shaded area, behind the building, under a tree, something where the environment is not as warm. Okay? And then, if you're going to take it to market, you need to package it somehow. And if you're going to package in trays, which a lot of folks do, the trays are going to be ventilated. Okay? And the reason for the ventilation is important because the fruit that you see on the table, it looks like it's dead, right? It's already off the tree, so it can't be alive. No, that fruit is alive. It's actually going through respiration like you and I are going through respiration. It's taking oxygen, it's putting out carbon dioxide, and putting out heat and humidity. So if you have the fruit in a closed environment and the fruit's going through that respiration process, so it's accumulating heat and humidity. And guess what's the worst thing for keeping food in a good shape and safe? Heat and humidity. The fruit itself will put out heat and humidity. So you want the ventilation to get rid of the heat and humidity. Ideally, you want to package in a single layer. Okay? That way, the upper layer don't put pressure on the lower layers. But if you have to use multi-layer, use some vegetation. You know, maybe some leaves from the trees to cushion the layers. Okay? So you can minimize that physical damage. Okay? And when you're done, keep them in evaporative cooler or underground. So you handle them properly, you harvest a little early, harvest a couple days early in the morning, late in the evening, package them right, keep them in the cool environment, and you're in a good shape. What's wrong with this picture? The respiration thing, okay? So that polyethylene bag, that plastic bag is locking in the heat, locking in the humidity. Those apricots are going to be stewed apricots by the end of the day. And you can actually see maybe a little condensation. There's another picture that is very clear. This is a better option, okay? Storage, again, you spend the whole season growing your potatoes and then you mishand them by keeping them like that where they have access to insects and rodents, then you're losing your crop. Okay. Same situation with the closed bags. Okay. Respiration will lock in the moisture. Something that is open, like this burlap bag, will get rid of the heat and humidity. It's a much better option. transporting grapes. You have nice wooden sturdy boxes, and that's great. The problem is the boxes have no ventilation. You don't see any ventilation here, right? And then the box is very deep. So the bottom layers of grape on the bottom of that box is going through this number for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours in the heat. So by the time we get to market, that bottom layer is grape juice, if not wine. If not wine.
Sir?
Yeah.
My mother always told me, like, if I wanted to ripen fruit faster, to put it in a brown paper bag. I mean, it's keeping it.
Right.
The way I'm picturing it is that it keeps it cool. The brown paper bag
No.
breathes, so.
No, the problem, that's, yeah.
I'll lie.
No, your mom is right, but
Okay.
it's not the cool. So people do that with tomato, right? Put tomato in a paper bag. Part of that respiration that I talked about, that the fruit actually takes oxygen, put out CO2, humidity, and heat. It also puts out something called ethylene gas. Okay, and ethylene gas is basically a gas that the fruit produces that make it ripe sooner. Okay, give you an example: bananas. When we buy bananas from South America, if you've seen that banana operation, they pick them up green and hard as they stable when they're harvested. Because if you wait till the banana ripe on the tree, trying to ship them here, they're not going to be any good, right? So we get the banana green, and they keep them green in the storerooms. When the market wants some bananas, they put them in a room and put some ethylene gas. So the ethylene gas that naturally comes from the fruit will make the fruit ripe. So her mom said, put the tomatoes in the brown bag. The reason is that the brown bag gonna keep the ethylene gas to ripen the tomato, but it's not a plastic bag like this where it's gonna trap that moisture. Okay, that moisture is gonna leave through the paper bag. Okay, you see what I mean? So the fruit won't go bad, but it will ripen. Did I answer your question on that? Okay. Display abuse. So a lot of the marketing of the produce in Afghanistan is display. So the passerby will see the nice fruit and they want to stop by and buy a kilo or two of whatever. So look at this picture, guys, and tell me, now that you know a little bit about how to handle fruit properly, what could this fella do to minimize the spoilage in the display market situation? Huh? The shade. Get an umbrella, get some awning, get the stuff off the ground. Open that bag of tomato. Put some holes in that box. How about keeping most of the fruit inside? Okay, so he wants to put the fruit outside to attract the buyer. Put something, but keep the most inside in the shade. When you sell a few kilos, bring some back. So very simple interventions to keep the shelf life, to keep the food available. In terms of packaging, it doesn't matter. It could be paper, it could be wood, it could be plastic. Personally, I prefer plastic because you can wash it. You can use it over and over. If you wash wood, it'll mold. If you wash paper, it'll fall apart. Plastic is good. A lot of folks don't like plastic. I like plastic in this particular case. So long as, it doesn't matter what the material is, so long as it's ventilated, because we have that respiration thing going on, right? Also, in terms of trays to market, and Chris is going to talk to you about that tomorrow from AID, that one of the successful interventions they've done is to have boxes for the fruit for marketing purpose. The boxes need to be able to stack without putting the load on the fruit itself. So the four corners of the trays or the boxes need to nest on top of one another so you don't have the weight on the fruit itself. So two simple design criteria: the ventilation and the stackability. That's all you need really for the proper tray. Now the other side of cooling, if you don't have access to a body of water to keep that burlap moist, to get the evaporative cooling, the next best thing is underground. Okay. If you grew up in the Midwest, a lot of folks have cellars where they keep their potatoes and onions and some fruit underground. And you need about maybe 8 feet underground. The temperature is constant, and it's cool, and it doesn't change, because the earth surrounding that underground cellar is a great insulator. So it's always cool. It's always proper for storage. This particular picture, you guys, is was taken by Colonel Johnny Isaac from Nevada ADT, and I believe this was in the Coast Province, where the ADT built some of those community underground storage for that village. And you can see they provided them with the proper trays, and based on Colonel Isaac's report, it worked very well in terms of keeping the food good. What didn't work very well is the farmers began to quarrel among one another because everybody has access to the storage, and this farmer said, well, when you came in, you take some of my grapes. When you came in, you took some of my grapes, so that was the conflict. But in terms of keeping the food good, that project was was very successful. It was during the construction of the underground cool storage. You can see, so if this fellow's maybe 6 feet, there is maybe 2-3 feet above his head where the room needs to be. This is a very fancy underground storage. It doesn't really have to be that fancy, but so long as you're about 6 to 8 feet below ground, you're in a good shape. Why do we have these chimneys? We're standing on the roof of that underground storage. The respiration thing. You got to get rid of the heat and the moisture. And here is going into that cellar. Any questions so far, you guys? Okay, so wheat. I know Jeff talked to you about wheat yesterday, and since wheat is very important, we're going to take a couple of minutes to talk about wheat storage. Most Afghan farmers don't really sell wheat. They raise wheat for the family. It doesn't matter whether you keep it for the family or sell it. You still need the wheat to be there throughout the year. And one of the major issues with wheat is obviously mold, particularly the aflatoxin mold that we talked about. So if you want to keep the wheat for a long time, basically till the next harvest, so you need basically a whole year, we're going to talk about appropriate storage of wheat. The most likely issue if the discussion came to wheat spoilage is going to be the wheat goes bad because insect, rodents, and mold. Insects and rodents, like we said, they're going to eat some of the food. They're going to bring some contamination on the wheat. And then they're going to open the wheat kernel by nibbling on it. And when you open that wheat kernel, it's the same principle as when you pick the apple and leave the stem on the tree. You open the food to the microorganisms that we don't see, and they spoil a lot faster. So if that was the issue, your thinking process as well, the grain loss is due to improper drying and storage. You have to dry the wheat properly, or the corn for that matter, and then store it properly. So your answer is, can we store the grain in an insects and rodent barrier? Okay, I got to make sure the grain is dry and put it in a barrier to insects and rodents. Okay, well, how am I going to do that? Well, this is the picture you see sometime, a structure like that is open, and you can see here there is really no barrier to insects and rodent, not here. I can see if that drum is closed or not, but if it's not closed, it's not going to do any good. Same here. So just piling the grain in the corner of the room or in some kind of structure like that is not enough. It's not enough. Let's talk about the moisture piece. And I wish I can tell you a simple way to figure out if the wheat is dry or not. Because if the wheat is not dry, it's going to mold, guaranteed. The question is it going to mold with the aflatoxin or any other mold that is not harmful? But either way, it's bad. Okay, one is a lot worse than the other. The ideal percent of wheat is 12%. And there is a lot of field units that you can take with you in the field and actually measure the moisture of the wheat. Okay, short of that is very tough to really tell. But if the wheat is more this color than this color, then it's not dry. It needs to be close to that color than this color. Okay. Now, some wheat farmers who attended the course before said, in the olden days, we take a kernel of wheat and chew on it. If it crumbled, that means it's dry. If not, maybe it's not. Some folks will say you grab a handful of wheat, squeeze as hard as you can, and you let go. If the wheat falls, it's dry. If you stick your hand, it's not. I don't know if these technique work or not, but we're going to try some of them on the field this afternoon. But in terms of wheat, before you entertain anything else, you got to ask yourself, is the wheat dry enough? Because if it's not, you're going to have problems. Obviously, if the wheat is dry, before you think about storage, you want to get the debris and the damaged wheat out of the way, and I think Jeff talked to you about that a little bit. And then when you're ready to entertain storage, basically anything in the environment, and I'm going to show you some options this afternoon on the farm, anything that put a barrier between the wheat and the insects and the grain would work. Okay, so I'm going to show you plastic bottle, metal cans, metal bucket, burlap bags, the water bottles, anything. I'm going to also show you a plastic bag that is being marketed by a Grain Pro company. It started in Africa. I understand now it's available in Afghanistan. And it's basically a very big Ziploc bag that is a little bit thicker gauge. And then folks will use it to store the grain. Again, if the grain is dry, it works. If the grain is not dry, it's not going to work. And here is that Grain Pro bag. And if you have the bag by itself, that's better than piling the wheat in the corner. If you have the bag in another bag, double bag it if you will, then you double the barrier between your wheat and the insects.
Do you know how much those bags cost?
I think last time I was told about $3. $3. Yeah. Now, is that a lot of money in Afghanistan or not? Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Purdue green storage bag project?
Yeah, in fact, the fellow from Purdue who's in that project was here with us last time, and he talked about that a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
And are they, how do you demonstrate to them that there's an insect problem? Because I heard from Purdue did some trials.
Yeah.
Because they went around interviewing farmers and said, do you have any problems with?
They probably tell you I don't have a problem.
And
Well,
they found that sometimes the unprotected grain would be up to 20% insects.
yeah. So the thing you can do if you go to a situation like that, okay, and you grab some of the grains, or if they have the grain in the corner, and you look at it, okay, first of all, you're going to see some insect droppings in there, so you point that out, and you can see some kernels that has been nibbled on, that the integrity of the kernel is broken. And you tell them, this is from an insect. And then you tell them why this is bad. And you talk about the spoilers, and you talk about the food safety issue, that this insect came in, that rodent came in, and left some droppings on there, and they're going to make your family sick. And that's actually the logic that I use to try to kind of relate the food safety security situation to the family. Would you want to feed that your kid now that you know what could happen? That's really your best option there.
I'm sorry, the Purdue egg?
Well, I was going to ask you if you were familiar with if it's similar to that. I know it's like a trip bag system, and there's something about twisting the tops.
Yeah, it's Paul. You're probably more familiar with the Purdue bag than.
Yeah, I'm not.
I think it's he said it's polypropylene bag, so it's a different kind of plastic, and it's a double layer. Yeah.
Some kind of breathing mechanism in it.
Yeah.
I would say, folks, though, if you're going to work in that area, again, that's something that you put in your toolkit. Be sure to contact Purdue, and we can give you the name of the professors in charge of it, because they certainly are promoting it, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and USDA has our extension project that's part of Purdue's effort in that extension project is doing some trial research on those bags, and there's no commercial producer in country at this time, as far as I know.
Well, the fellow told us.
The Grain Pro, not to confuse folks here too much, but the bag that Penny's showing is called Grain Pro, and there is a distributor in Kabul. I think it may be Noor Brothers or someone like this, a major agro-input dealer. So the last time I checked on the website, these bags are distributed in.
But they're not. I don't think they're made in Afghanistan.
No.
So I think
No,
that's
they're not.
more expensive. And they were
Right.
Purdue one. They were looking for like a local manufacturer.
Actually, the fellow told us last time, if you remember, Paul, that the Purdue bag now they find somebody to produce in Afghanistan. The fellow was here like 6 weeks ago, so that's fairly recent.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just another plastic bag, really. Yeah.
It's a new program opportunity.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if those resources were available to the ministry, or for the Dale.
Oh, I would assume they would work.
Yeah,
because
that's part of an extension project where they're working directly with 4 specific dales in the country. So, yeah, the problem is that it's cost prohibitive.
Okay, wrap it up. I will wrap it up. So when you have access to a bag like that, obviously the grain has to go in dry, and as much as you can, try to compact it, push the air out. Why do I want to push the air out of the bag before I close the bag? I don't want the mold to grow, because the mold likes air. If there is little mold in there, it's not going to grow. If there's some insects in there, it's going to die. It's not going to keep growing and eating my food, so I want less air inside. Some people say before you, if I have any more pictures, we'll get to that later. Generally, in terms of storage of grains, you want to keep it away from the wall, away from the ground. If you have access to something like that, what they call a rat guard, so the rodent won't be able to get inside there, you're better off. So basically make it difficult for the insects and rodent to get into your wheat. These silos were distributed to some folks in Afghanistan by an NGO. My understanding, they work very well. The problem is, in something like that, if you don't have the grain dry enough going in, you're going to have a problem. Some folks suggested that if you have something like that, you put the grain in to keep the air out for the mold and the insects, you light a candle, okay, and then you close it and let the candle basically use all the oxygen in there, and then you basically have an environment with no oxygen. So if there's mold spores, they're not going to grow. If there are insects, they're not going to keep eating your food. And then finally, the time of the year, when you're going to get there and what might be happening, or maybe before you deploy, you think, I'm going at that time in that area, and the Afghan Ag is a great site to figure out, and in that area, this is going on, and this time of year, they're harvesting, they're marketing, they're planting, whatever the case might be, try to kind of line up that timing with the activity in the region. And I think, Paul, I need like 3 more minutes. Okay. So what we talked about, you guys, the proper handling and keeping the commodities cool will extend the shelf life. We talked about how many weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, could be 12 weeks, depends on the commodity. But what if I want the food to be good for the whole year? Okay, then here we're talking about preservation. So keep it cool for fresh commodities. If you want to preserve it for the rest of the season, even to the next season, then we're talking about we have to dry the food, okay? So I have excess fruits and vegetables. I don't know what to do with it. I can't take it to market. Your thinking gear is the simple way to preserve the food is to remove the water from the food. So all these spoilage reactions that we talked about early, they all have one thing in common. They have to have water to go on. You take the water away, they will not go on, okay? So the answer is I need to figure out a way to dry the food to keep it available throughout the year. How are you going to do that? Solar dry or sun drying. The difference between solar drying and sun drying is sun drying, you slice the food, you leave it outside, it'll dry. Okay, but that invites a lot of contamination from the environment. So solar drying is just one step above that, where you actually have a structure, like I'm going to show you this afternoon on the farm, where you still take advantage of the sun to dry the food, but keep it away from the contamination, and also extend the drying time, particularly at night when it's cool outside, you don't have sun. If the solar dryer, the structure is warm, the drying process will continue, okay? And we're going to look at that on the farm this afternoon. Now, most folks will know that if you want to dry food, you need heat, and that's half of the equation. The other half is, a lot of folks don't think about is airflow. So 2 things you need to dry food. You need heat and airflow. Most folks get the heat part right. A lot of folks forget about the airflow, okay? So keep that in mind. And solar drying is a perfect application for the Afghan situation. We're going to keep the food for the whole year without any moving parts, without any power, without any maintenance, just using the sun to dry the food. And they do that anyway. That's a traditional way of doing it. If you can improve the situation a little bit, make it cleaner, make it more efficient, then you've done a lot of good. Basic sanitation and hygiene in handling the food. Okay, this is something very straightforward, but something may not be very obvious is sharp knives. If you want to slice the food, because remember, with drying the food, we want to increase the surface area. okay, give the water room to leave the food, you got to slice the food, okay? Sharp knife is very important. If you don't have a sharp knife, you're not really slicing the food. You're kind of squeezing some of the juice out of the food, and the more liquid or juice comes out of the food, the more contamination is going to take place. So sharp knife, something very simple, most folks don't think about it, makes a big difference in the quality of the food. And maximizing airflow is very, very important. We look at some picture of drying. So here we have a simple tray with a perforated bottom. That could be nylon, could be metal. Tomato sliced, excuse me, and left out in the sun. That's a perfect situation. The downside, contamination. And then one thing I need to kind of talk to you about is when you're drying. Remember, we said when you cut the fruit, we're exposing to the environment, so spoil is going to increase. So the timing is very important here. You want to be able to dry the food fast enough before the microorganism can take over. So it becomes like a race between you and the bugs. So you want a lot of heat, a lot of air flow to dry fast enough before they spoil the food. Okay. This is another solar dry somebody designed in Egypt, and they have sliced melon inside. The problem with that bottom one, see those holes? That's the fellow's idea of airflow. Well, guess what? It's not enough. And those melons molded on the inside. Remember, heat and airflow. This fellow forgot about the airflow part. That's not enough airflow.
Just one additional comment. Guys, keep in mind also the gender aspects of these food preservation, because I'm going to go out on a limb, but probably that's the job of the females in the family. So there may be more female engagement activities among them. You can talk to men all day long about proper drying of food, but that may not be their area of responsibility. So you got to get the gender right.
Exactly. Yeah. So a better design that I actually designed after the fellow designed this one without the airflow is something like that. Where again we have the trays, perforated bottom, and my idea of airflow was to get that chimney up so the air heats up, go through the product, picks up the water, and leaves through the chimney. Turned out that chimney is not big enough, so I didn't listen to my own advice, and I didn't really supply enough airflow. But the one I designed for the ADAPT project here has enough airflow. I'll show you that this afternoon. This is in Afghanistan, like Paul said. You can see most of the activity on the solar drying are with the women, and those were built by the Nevada ADT, Colonel Isaac's team, and they built them, did the demonstration, trained some folks, and according to him, local folks now are building those dryers. And guess what? Not only we have food security situation and food safety, because hopefully they're clean, but we have a little bit of enterprise going on. So we have all three: food safety, food security, economic development, something as simple as that. So here you see somebody training some of the folks on how to properly use and prepare the food for a solar dryer. It's micro enterprise in process. Okay, if those folks will do that, a whole bunch of villages will have enough dry fruit to interest the buyer in Afghanistan, in India, somewhere like that. Finally, a couple of words on raisins. Some of the green raisins that I talked about earlier are dried in a closed structure like that. They call it the shishmish khanas. And the idea here is that the grapes will be hung inside. I'll show you a picture pretty soon. And all these holes will provide the ventilation. So you have the heat and the ventilation, but not direct contact with the sun. So the raisin that you see, the common black raisin, is dried out in the sun. We do that here. We just cut them up on a piece of paper right on the field, and that will dry, but a little dark because the sun basically will brown the raisin. If you put them in a shaded environment like that, they'll dry and they still be green, and hence the green raisin. These are not the same as the golden raisin that you find here. Those are being treated with sulfur to make them golden. This is the actual natural green color of the grapes. And here's a picture on the inside of the grape hanging, and they have that green color of the original grape. Is another picture of the same thing. Some folks don't have the investment to build the Shishmish Khana, so they have a lattice like that and some corrugated metal to shade it, and they still can do dry raisin without having that fancy structure on the inside. And here, raisins being dried on mats as opposed to being dry on the ground, which was a traditional situation. So by simply putting a mat between the grapes and the ground, you increase the quality and you reduce the potential spoilage of the grapes. Something that's very simple as that. Mats are available. They're very common. Folks use them for prayers and such. I believe that was an AID project, and Crispin will tell you tomorrow that was one of the successful stories. Just give them a mat, have them put the grapes on the mat, the market price quadruple because they're clean. Because the raisin buyer, he knows that you're going to send me some raisins with some rocks and dirt and this to them. I got to clean them. I'm not going to pay as much for it. You give me some clean raisins, I'm going to pay you more for them. All you need is a mat. Simple as that. So we're talking about the food safety situation. So this is how the raisin come to the plant. And what you see here, you can tell how dirty the raisins are, right? So this is the ones without the mats. Pretty much the color of the dirt. And then you have all these bird droppings. You heard about salmonella? This is how salmonella happens. So the folks on the front end of the plant, they unload the bags, push the raisin down the line. Can anybody figure out what all those specks are? That's the dust. When I developed that picture, I said, what happened to my camera? Something is wrong. That was the light reflecting off of the dust from the raisin. So it gives you an idea. Remember I told you about the bowl of raisins and all the dust? It's loaded with dust and dirt. So that raisin then will go down the line and get washed. In Afghanistan, they do cold water. And that will basically plump the raisins a little bit, which you want that because when they're dry, they're very, very dry. You can't eat them. They're almost like a rock. So you need to wash them to get some of the dirt out and plump them a little bit. Sometimes they overwater them, then they have to leave them out in the sun to dry a little bit. And then finally they go into bags and they go to the market. So the conclusion, you guys, is food security, food safety, economic development are all linked together, and there is simple ways to do it without a lot of investment, with a lot of sustainable, simple interventions. I'm going to skip over that one. We talked about the season, and just want to give you some option for each bag. If you work at all in that post-harvest area, you can contact me directly. The eAfghan Ag on the UC Davis site is very helpful. And if you want to look at the solar dryer design, it's posted on that bottom website. And I have the design, and it's a blow design. So if you want to replicate it or get an idea how it fits together, you have that as well. That's all I have, you guys. Be glad to answer any questions you may have. Going once, going twice. Okay, thank you.